Hello from Possibility Wave. This is part 2 of a larger presentation entitled Signal Encoding Theory in Biofeedback. Part 1 focused on the boundaries of belief, and if you've not had a chance to look and listen to that, I would encourage you to search out part number 1. Parts 1 through 4 have been designed to be experienced in sequence if possible. So check out part number 1, the boundaries of belief. This is part number 2, the large presentation of signal encoding theory in biofeedback. Hi, my name is Garnet Dupuis and I'm your presenter today. I'm the co-founder and creative designer of Possibility Wave and all of its information-coded biofeedback tools. I'm speaking to you from the beautiful mountain rainforest in northern Thailand, and I'm thanking you for spending the time with me today. If you'd like to contact us, you can go to possibilitywave.com at any time. And we'll look forward to having a lot of information available to you. Go to possibilitywave.com. Part 2. The title of this part is Compassionate Communication. This is a sensitive topic, a fascinating topic to me. I don't know how often we get to put the two words together, compassion and communication. As you'll see, the concept, the appreciation of compassionate communication is really at the heart of Possibility Wave and its belief and perspective on the entire process of communication. Communication in life, in creation, certainly communication within the domain of information-coded biofeedback. So, the purpose of this part is to do our best to explore the experience we call communication. And not only what it is or how it happens, but its fundamental nature. And at Possibility Wave, we make the claim that the fundamental nature of communication incorporates compassion. So we recognize compassionate communication. I think it's pretty evident that the principle of biofeedback as a methodology and a technology relies entirely on communication. And the more that a person studies what we'll call nature, or life, or reality, it becomes clear that there's a constant flow of information, that there's a constant experience of biofeedback. Biofeedback is not really a technical innovation or creation as much as it is an extension of what systems, complex systems, do all the time. So let's have a look at the basis and nature of communication from the Possibility Wave perspective. Oh, you know, most stories start at the beginning. How it all started? Maybe. According to our current science, and actually this view is relatively new, it's only from around the 1960s, so it's within the past few decades, that our science, our dominant science, decided on this principle called the Big Bang, that everything began in some astounding moment from, what do we call it? From nothingness, somethingness began, and it's called the Big Bang. Here at Possibility Wave, we look at it a little differently. We prefer to call it the Big Hello, not the Big Bang, the Big Hello. And before the Big Hello, before the Big Bang, what was what? Current science has really no answer to what could have existed before the space-time event they call the Big Bang. Well, Possibility Wave believes awareness was before the Big Hello, and it will be awareness after the Big Bye-Bye. The Big Hello and the Big Bye-Bye. Before, during, and after. Awareness just is. This, of course, is provocative thought, to say the least. In various traditions, they make the assertion, the claim, that there have been many big hellos and big bye-byes. These cycles are said to repeat, that awareness expressing itself into creation has occurred so many times. A kalpa is it's a Sanskrit word. It means basically an eon. What we would say is a very, very long period of time by the human calculation. And this principle is found in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, the kalpa. There are various references. One that's considered more credible or authoritative within its tradition, the Hindu Puranas. They define a kalpa as equaling 4.32 billion years. Or you could say a very, very long time. When the Buddha was asked, how many kalpas have already passed? He is said to have said, if you count the total number of sand particles at the depths of the Ganges River, from where it begins to where it ends at the sea, even that number of sand particles will be less than the number of past kalpas. So, I don't know whether you believe this or not, whether I believe it or not. I accept it as, I don't know, for some odd reason it seems reasonable to me, although it completely shatters my conventional sense of the way things are. But all sorts of things shatter it. You know, if you look at the information of the expansive extension of physical space, and the little speck that even our galaxy is amongst so many galaxies, you know, it's how can you just have to give it up. I don't know. And the same thing when you go into the atomic and quantum domains. You know, as we say in Possibility Wave, you can get stuck in the middle because you make a reference of everything compared to the size of the human body. That's the big and small. And how long we live, that's the how much time, how many years. So there's an entirely reasonable chance that the space-time event, the big hello and the big bye-bye, has been is an innumerable times of experience. So that's a sort of a general perspective, just to begin with, that we believe, we accept that awareness is constant throughout this entire, I guess it's not even a time-space thing. How can you say how big it is, how long it is? To introduce another concept which is being used a lot these days, the field. I grew up a farmer, so a field was pretty much where you had to go plow and disc and plant the wheat. But a field, the standard definition of a field is the influence of some agent considered as existing at all points in space and defined by the force it would exert on an object placed at any point in that space. So the influence of an agent, all points in space. Field. This is a term that we use at Possibility Wave. I'd like you to consider it. The term is continuum. Awareness would be that agent that creates an influence at all points in space. This, you could say, field of awareness. It's completely unbounded by space and time. I don't know how to think about that. You can't think about it. You just have to, I don't know what, accept it or be open to it. And this field of awareness it's infinite. No center, no periphery. Notice how we always, not always, but so frequently use these three-dimensional spatial references, center and periphery. I guess, the definition aims at encouraging us to loosen up. So here at Possibility Wave, this influence, the influence of the agent, I guess the agent would be awareness, the influence is the field of awareness. We call this the continuum. So if at any point in time you come across a reference to continuum, that's what it means in Possibility Wave. The continuum is the field of awareness, unbounded by space and time. It's infinite with no center or periphery. So it's the continuum that says hello in the big hello. And, I don't know, it's so difficult to express these things, but we try. This thing that we call life is the continuum expressing itself as creation. The continuum maintains itself. It's an inseparable essence in all that it manifests. That's why you may have encountered in part one the boundaries of belief, the fundamental Possibility Wave axiom that awareness is the matrix of reality. Here is one of the conceptual links, or the conceptual bricks in the foundation of what we're trying to express to you as compassionate communication. It's the continuum, the nature, the characteristic of the continuum that allows communication in life. Every part communicates with everything, and everything communicates with every part. It's an unbroken, we'll say field, we don't know what to call it, field of awareness. And because of this unity, this singularity in sort of a different context, this fact of awareness that is why communication is what it is, why it happens, how it happens. The continuum allows information exchange by connecting all the parts and being everywhere simultaneously. If we think in terms of objects, especially separate objects, if we think in terms of mechanics, one of my favorite ones is, how does the mind and the body communicate? What's the mind-body connection? I think it's an unanswerable question because the question itself is flawed. It assumes a separation, a distinction between the two. Then you wonder, what kind of little bridge or wire or little messenger or something can go back and forth between these two. I think that that's a big mistake. That's a big mistake. The idea that awareness manifests is something that we introduced in part 1. And here, as a kind of reminder or repetition or extension of that, is the idea that consciousness and all its variations, these are manifest modulations of fundamental awareness. It's not like awareness is one thing, consciousness is another thing, and all the varied aspects of consciousness. There's so many states, right? I don't know, it's like taking a blanket. You can make it flat, you make it crumpled, you can roll it, you can fold it, you can do all these things with it, but it's still the blanket. Weird analogy, but similar to awareness. And what is information? To try to give it a concept, we would say that information is the manifest intelligence of awareness. And the information field, or what we call the I field, it's a subset, and it's nested, it's within the continuum. So if you fold the blanket in certain ways, you could say it's expressing patterns of information, but it's still the blanket. Whenever we talk about these kinds of things, we're really forced to use a lot of analogies, because speaking directly of the actuality is probably impossible. It's impossible for me, anyway. Oh, here, this point is sometimes I use the word profound, and maybe I use it too often, but a lot of things seem profound when you go, like Alice, down the rabbit hole to have a look at all of these things as best you can. So here, the first impression is like, oh, wait a minute. Information can be very easily transmitted because in reality, there are no distances in this dimension. It's not a space-time kind of place. So, oh yeah, it's easy to transmit information because there's actually no distance. But then you take it one step further and you realize, well, in fact, what is taking place is not even a transmission. Because the continuum and its I field are not bounded by the constraints of space and time. So what you arrive at, and I would say hold on to your hats or your chair or your seat or something, is the fact that the movement of information, it's an illusion. There's no here and there. So, the idea, let's say in certain forms of what we'll call mind-to-mind communication, oh, I'm going to send you this thought, and because you're on the other side of the planet, I've really got to kind of bounce it off a cloud or something, or I have to use a lot of effort because it's so far away. I don't think those ideas are correct. The movement of information, it's an illusion. It's all here and now because it doesn't deal with space and time. So what about compassion? The whole part is called compassionate communication. This point, and I don't know if I've introduced it reasonably well in this presentation so far. You try your best, and you have a certain amount of time and PowerPoints and little pictures and words. This, to me, is one of the elements of really making a game change. It's a game changer to what you could say, recognize that, number one, all of reality communicates all the time, that's a big deal in and of itself. But to add to that, that it is a natural, compassionate communication is, I don't know, it goes to the heart mind for me. So, compassion. Awareness expresses self-awareness in the big hello. That's what the big hello is. You could say that all of creation is a kind of a mirror of awareness. And, catch this point, or, contemplate upon it, or consider it at least, is that pure self-awareness is one and the same of what we would call pure self-love. Pure self-awareness, pure self-love. Know thyself and to thine own self be true. Self-awareness can only engender self-love. Awareness of your nature. Not awareness of what band you like or something, but the identity. Pure self-awareness is pure self-love. And awareness expresses self-awareness in the big hello. This is the point, and I've thought about how to convey it. This is currently the best shot in a narrated PowerPoint. It's self-awareness and self-love. They're why all communication is motivated by inherent compassion. Life loves itself. Compassion is an intrinsic quality of life. Life as self-awareness, awareness mirroring itself in creation. I don't trust dualistic concepts. And it becomes, of course, once you abandon dualism, a lot of the talk is kind of paradoxical. Tao Te Ching, that which, the way that can be expressed is not the way, the Tao. So because of this compassion, this is the word we put, compassione, to feel with, life feels itself, life loves itself, life seeks out communication. And this is really helpful. When we devise systems like information-coded biofeedback, it's not as though we're trying to make a hard sell to organisms. We're not trying to make it's not a hard sell. It's like trying to convince or trick or, squeeze out the information. Life actually wants to communicate. It seeks out communication. Just, you kind of have to know how to look and listen, because it's there. And the motivation, if that's the word, for this communication is compassion. Life loves itself. It wants to live its life in all the ways that it does. And if you think of big hellos and big bye-byes and how many kalpas and kind of, what is sometimes called the day and night of Brahma, or the breath of Brahma, the Vedic concept, and that life just keeps inhaling and exhaling itself in creations. So there'll be a lot more discussion coming forward in this presentation, but this, if you wonder about the title, Compassionate Communication, this is the train of thought. This is the logic that we've developed, or not developed hardly. We profess here in Possibility Wave. It looks like that. An inherent compassion. because self-awareness has self-love. Creation wants, needs, can, and will constantly communicate with itself simultaneously everywhere. It's like you're at a party and all the conversations are going on. You just got to slip in between a couple of people and listen, and then offer your opinion. It's simultaneous everywhere. It's a little anthropomorphic to say it wants, needs, can, and will, but seems like that. And this I don't know, we'll use a common vernacular, this network, it has no limits of capacity. A little bit of computer thinking, I guess, right? How big is your hard drive or memory? There's no limits of capacity, and it can store and share infinite information simultaneously and never become saturated. So communication is happening. Communication is a complete reflection of a compassionate quality of awareness manifest. Okay, so that's so far in this presentation the best effort to create a perspective on the fact that communication is happening all the time, why it's happening, because of the continuum, and that this communication has an inherent characteristic or quality of compassion, because self-awareness engenders self-love, and love and life, well, life loves itself. Next of all, let's look a bit more at kind of two big categories of communication that are involved in information-coded biofeedback. Okay, first of all, common concepts. Two terms are used, one local communication and the other non-local communication. In common, you know, normally I guess you could say that when you think of local communication, that it requires some kind of physical proximity, and that when we say non-local, it's kind of like a non-meaning meaning. We know what local means, but non-local is just a term that's evolved where there are these types of communication that apparently supersede physical space. They can occur at really great distances. So let's look at this local and non-local set of concepts when we talk about communication. Okay. Local. It's this principle of proximity. But proximity is a very relative concept. Proximity can be as intimate as physical contact, like touch. However, physical proximity can also be at a huge distance. So you just look at the dots up there. I mean, you know, they're not the same patterns, but I guess you could say they have proximity. You know, how local is local, especially when you consider the concept of energy. I have a hard time really, I don't know, grokking what, you know, these distances are, but like Neptune, it's over 4 trillion kilometers from the sun, yet the energy, a conventional energy of gravity, it still acts upon that planet, even though it's over 4 trillion kilometers away. So that's an energy exchange, and apparently the proximity of over 4 trillion kilometers is still proximate enough for that influence, that you could say that there's a communication that is local between Sun and Neptune, and that communication takes place through the gravity field. And then even more mind-blowing, taking an example of the Virgo cluster, which is this whole collection of galaxies, you know, in the measurements, and I don't know how they do this, but I'll accept it. They say it's 65 million light years away from us. It means it takes, for how fast light travels, and it takes light 65 million years to get from there to where we are. And yet we can still detect the electromagnetic photonic energy. We experience it as light. So how local is local? Is distance really a factor in the energetic exchanges in local communication? Okay, let's look a little bit at non-local. The same thing, you know, this proximity thing. Because it's appreciated that in local communication there's some kind of measurable energetic exchange, and in non-local nobody knows how it happens. But it's always thought, you know, non-local means super far away. But even though non-local implies great distances, it can also refer to dynamics where the distance is very small. I mean, even things that are in contact. You know, in certain forms of biofeedback, the transmission of information, if it's non-local, perhaps the person's in a different state or a different country or somewhere, you think, oh, that's non-local. But what happens if they're just a meter away, but you don't have any wires, you know, you don't have any Bluetooth or radio waves or anything coming out? You say, well, you know, it's happening. So non-local, although we tend to think in terms of non-local as being super far away, like on the image there, you know, somebody sending love non-locally from California to New York or Boston or wherever that is. We have to be careful when we conceptualize what entails local communication and what entails non-local communication. As we saw earlier, the continuum and its I field permit instantaneous sharing of information at unlimited distances, as we had said, with a transmission, in quotes, that is actually an illusion. So we have to recognize, and please, you know, kind of catch my point as well or not as I'm explaining it, that even in communications that we might assume to be local, there's every possibility that there are non-local dynamics also in effect. So how we think about local and non-local has tended to be related a lot to what we think is a direct transmission, and certainly involves the issue of distance. So we have to be careful about this. Otherwise, we end up painting ourselves into a corner when we try to create methodologies and technologies or put these in practice with different people or animals or whatever. So remember, in the sub-quantum domain, all the way to the just isness of the continuum, that nothing moves. Nothing moves in the continuum. Nothing moves in the I field. The continuum might be like the Dharmakaya, perhaps, of Tibetan Buddhism. Nothing moves. It just manifests. So, you know, breathe that one in, sort of roll it over, like, what's that like? You know, in this level, communication happens not by movement, but by what we don't know what to call it. We call it non-local phenomena. It's an aspect of communication without moving waves. This is the information zone. This is the non-local domain. It really changes so much of the imagination or the inner viewing of the phenomena when you stop thinking that you have to send something that's far away to somebody and somehow they can get it. So my invitation, my encouragement to myself and all of you is to really rethink the whole issue of local and non-local. Because whenever there's this issue of distance, space, whenever it's considered, any time that there's a transmission that moves in space, as does happen in energetics. You know, sometimes when I watch CNN and I'm watching a reporter in wherever, Atlanta, speaking to somebody in the Middle East, and they say something, there's always that pause as, I suppose, it's bouncing off satellites and doing what it does, that it's not the same rhythm and timing as a normal conversation, because there really is an energy process occurring, measurable and understandable, although amazing. And it takes some time for that propagation of message to travel through the circuitry, the mechanics of the transmission. So here's the encouragement that following the general possibility wave approach, it's better to rethink local and non-local without using the distance factor to distinguish them. Because, I mean, shoot, I mean, how far is the Virgo cluster or Neptune? And yet there are still measurable energy processes involved, gravity and electromagnetic photonic, right? I mean, you can understand it even though it's preposterously amazing. It's still a factor of the transmission of energy along reasonably well-known processes. So let's rethink local and non-local without using the distance factor to distinguish them. This is the proposition from Possibility Wave. When we think of local, think of it as having a measurable energy medium of communication and that it works in space and time. And then think of non-local as utilizing information as a medium of communication, and that this is instantaneous, that even the concept of transmission is an illusion. And don't think that something local has to be physically near. Don't think that non-local has to be physically far. Think in terms of an energetic medium of communication and an information medium of communication. For local, think in terms of the bounding parameters of space and time. For non-local, accept and recognize effortless and instantaneous. I think that'll make everything easier as we progress along in the exploration and discovery, the learning process associated with information-coded biofeedback applications and the whole approach from Possibility Wave. Okay, let's look at a few examples. You know, what we'll call local and energy, as opposed to factoring it as distance. There are lots of examples. I've just plucked just 2 or 3 from each category here. In the 1920s, Gershwin really did some wonderful work, and without detailing it, because it's easily available in books and over the internet, he discovered that there are these ultraviolet electromagnetic radiations that were being transmitted from one plant form to another. So, you know, these are measurable, they're physical energy. Remember from part 1 where we made an agreement, energy as a term refers to the physical energies. Information refers to the non-physical and information processes. So this is energetic, with energy. And he named what we call now biophoton emissions, he called them mitogenic radiations. And this was energy that was transmitting information from one plant to another. It's a very clever process that he went through, and you know, have a look at it sometime if you don't already have a good deal of familiarity, because it's oftentimes spoken about in different forms of like the emerging quantum biology field and other related quantum concepts. This one is so interesting to me because it comes into the direct experience that we have as humans and with other animals. You've probably heard, it's true, the human heart produces a magnetic field. This field is about 5,000 times stronger than the brain, because we always think of the brain as this, mega machine with all these electrochemical processes. The heart 5,000 times outdoes what the brain can do in terms of producing a magnetic field. And that, you could say proof of this, although people have recognized it within their own personal subjective domain for ages, that you can take a very sensitive device called a squid device, it's an acronym, and not an actual squid from the ocean, and it measures magnetic perturbations, magnetic fields. And you can have a human standing right across the room, a very good sized room from the machine, and still the squid device can detect the magnetic information, the field impulses of the heart from all the way across the room. So, when you have a field, there's no exact end. It diminishes in intensity if it's electromagnetic, which the heart field is, but nobody knows where it ends. But certainly, when we're together, if you and I are in the same room, or especially sitting side by side, or imagining even hugging each other, we are actually experiencing each other's heart information through these magnetic fields. To have limited the heart organ as a mechanical pump is such a tragic concept. And only slowly is that relenting to realize that the heart as an organ and as a function is so vast in terms of its capacity and its potential. So anyway, that's an example of local communication. It's by energy. It's not what may be called a subtle energy process. I would say that it's local communication in terms of an energetic process. And how proximate do you have to be? Well, 1 inch, 1 foot, 1 yard, 1 room, it's all still working. Okay, for the other, some non-local communication and information. You may remember our encouragement for you to think of local as involving energy transmission in space-time, and non-local as information manifestation that occurs instantaneously without any bounded conditions of space and time. These days, the most famous example from science of non-local communication is this, famed or now infamous behavior of entangled particles, entanglement. These particles, once in contact, they remain, we don't know what the word is, we'll say connected, regardless of distance. In defiance of space-time, they instantly respond to each other via the information field, the I field. It's accepted, but how is not understood. And yes, even Einstein was wrong sometimes because he disagreed with this, although it's been proven to be correct innumerable times since that. And he called it spooky action at a distance. He didn't buy it, but he was wrong. It occurs. This next point is timely and crucial in its implications. Non-local communication of entangled particles does not only occur in the rarefied domain of particle physics, but also within living organisms. Very recent research is proving this to be true, and the expectation is that the number of verified examples is just going to continue. In this case, there's this bird. It's a European robin, lives up in the Scandinavian, Northern European area, and once a year, to escape the cold, wisely, it goes down towards the Mediterranean. And how it does this has been a curiosity. Many animals migrate, of course, and Nobody knows, perhaps there are different mechanisms for different species. But in this case, this robin achieves a very sensitive magnetoreception from the action of entangled electrons that are in its natural biological compass. It uses this thing called an inclination compass. It's very complicated, something I only barely understand as an idea. But in a two-step process where first of all they recognize this thing called the inclination compass as a basic design, but then how was it able to pick up such extraordinarily weak signals as it flew over uncharted territory? And the discovery now is that there are entangled electrons. Again, here, it's not as though the electrons have to be on opposite sides of the solar system or something like that. We said earlier that the whole issue of distance is really an unfair characteristic to determine what is local and non-local. So these electrons are, you could say physically, extremely close to each other, and yet their behavior is that of entanglement. So the message here, aside from the complication of the research, complicated to me, is the fact that living organisms also take advantage of, are involved with, rely upon non-local communication in expressions such as entanglement. That's, to cross that line is huge, and we've crossed it. More non-local phenomena and the issue of consciousness. You know, consciousness is, in what I'll call conventional science, is not even recognized as existing, or if it is existing, it's thought to be an imagined or delusionary side effect from electrochemical processes. So it's the big problem in biology. It's the big problem in science, is the fact that it's the conscious mind that is saying that the conscious mind doesn't exist. Troublesome. Anyway, perhaps the most provocative element to emerge from quantum physics is the observer effect. You've all heard about that. When observed or measured, or measured, what's called the wave of probability instantly collapses into a single state. What does that mean? You know, in our Adapt Wellness Biofeedback app, the subtitle is Possible, Probable, Certain. We deal an awful lot with a depth appreciation of what this means. Even the name of the company, Possibility Wave, points in that direction. And that as an event is maturing out of very broad ranges of possibility, and by all the varied factors, is being reduced down into a limited set of more significant probabilities, there are still lots and lots and lots of ways for the event to occur. It's like I don't know, I was watching a football game earlier. It's like there are a lot of ways, if it's second down and 8 yards to go, there are lots of ways of achieving that. And then it comes down to a few selections of plays, and then you watch the defense, and maybe you call an audible, and you go for it. But you don't know the certainty until it actually happens. So it's called superposition, that as an event is maturing, and this isn't like it has to be eons, it's also in like fractions of seconds all the time. In the maturation into probability, there are all of these ways that the it can choose to happen, and that multiple factors will finally mature it into fruition, and you have the certainty of an actuality. It happens. But you don't know, you don't know what horse wins the race until the horse crosses the finish line, even though you may know what the odds are, or you can see the race shaping as they come around the final turn. In quantum physics, it's this shocking and fascinating fact that when the process is observed or measured, it collapses down into a single state. It expresses itself as a certainty in relation to the observation. So the multiple probable states of the wave function is expressed suddenly as a single certain state in that instant. And there's no energy that is transferred, it just manifests as such. Now here's the question as to whether it's just that the observation, the conscious act of observing or measuring, is it just a disturbance? Is it just what's called a perturbation? That it doesn't have any direction or anything like that. It's just, it's sticking a wrench in the cog of the wheel. It's a disturbance. Well, because this has been provocative, there have been very well conducted experiments that indicate that there is also the possibility that intention can create specific effects. So it appears to be not only disturbance or perturbation, but that there's also the possibility of conscious intervention with intention. So, there are different references to this, although, not many, but certainly, for example, in Physics Essays, and that's a very professional, peer-reviewed journal, they reported a double-slit optical system experiment. And they devised the experiment, and I won't go into details, but they designed it to test whether there's the possible role of conscious intent in the collapse of the wave function. And, I would say to my satisfaction and the satisfaction of many other like-minded people, the study found quite clearly that consciousness significantly correlated in predicted ways with the perturbations. So it isn't just that the intervention of the observer, the observation measurement process, is just like screw something up and it collapses, but actually there is the ability to extend this influence in consciousness with the addition of intent. I think for those that have done research over the past few years, the best known scientific experiments on non-local effects of consciousness and intent came out of Princeton in their famed Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, PAIR as it's called. Fascinating work, extremely well documented, and reported in a few technical but well-written books as well. I'm very fortunate because some number of years back, during a lot of the formation of my own research and understanding, learning, Brenda Dunn, the female to the right of the photo, was kind enough to help me along in the understandings. We enjoyed conversations by phone, and they were very kind to send me a lot of documentation. I'm very thankful personally to her for that help many years ago. Anyway, over the years of testing, the effects of intention upon random event-generated events showed without doubt that conscious intention has an effect upon sensitive information processes. It was the first, and it went on for years and years. It was really not really, it is the first, other than a lot of the various, what are normally called parapsychology or paranormal research projects, totally fascinating, highly credible, in the US, many of them conducted by the government, have shown all sorts of associations. This is the best documented in terms of methodology and statistics. There are lots of really interesting things that come out of the PAIR research. One of them is that the behaviors of the different people were so consistent that the researchers could look at the pattern and in most cases clearly identify who the operator was, who the person was that was doing the process. It carried that kind of signature. Anyway, the one I'm referring to here in the presentation is that subjects were typically successful in affecting a change, away from a particular norm. You can see them charted here. But sometimes, certain people especially ended up making the change, but making it in the opposite direction intended. So it's not as though they had no effect. They had a measurable statistical, you could say, real effect on the process, on the event, but they would get it opposite. So if for example, if they were supposed to make a positive shift, they would make a shift, a statistically significant shift away from the norm, but it would be towards the negative, or the negative towards the positive. So there's this really fascinating thing of opposite effects that can occur. To me, it's intriguing that this paradoxical opposite effect is often witnessed in standard biofeedback. I'm citing here as a simple example, like an EMG style biofeedback where you're trying to reduce muscle tension, a very common one and highly useful. So many times, especially in the beginning, but with certain people it just persists. The subject, they have an intention, say, to relax the neck muscle, whatever is being monitored. When they do what they do, actually they increase the tension, which is opposite to their intention. It is, you could explain it away in from different approaches, but this concept of the opposite effect occurring in standard biofeedback and in this other elegant, non-local information style biofeedback at pair just really strikes me as having the probability of a common factor, I would say. So, you wonder about it. I thought about it a lot. I've worked with it quite a while, theoretically and in practice. Why this opposite effect happens. And I'm thinking it may be because of some kind of hidden anxiety or self-doubt, or maybe kind of like trying too hard, or maybe doubting oneself, or maybe it's just a lack of faith, or maybe even secretly not believing in the possibility of benefit or change. I don't know. I don't pretend to know, but it's consistent, and it strikes me as being oftentimes kind of what you see in life. It isn't curtailed or restricted to biofeedback processes. So, looking more at the kind of underlying attitude that a person may not even recognize in themselves. And this takes us all the way back to part one of the presentation, where we look at the boundaries of belief and how we interpret and believe reality to be, and how we are in our own minds. So I've gone into this in some detail. I wrote quite an extensive thesis on it at one time, the unconscious and its role in biofeedback. And you have to admit that standard forms of biofeedback frequently work well for their specific purposes, but the users cannot explain how they do what they do to make the changes. Usually when they're asked, they'll say things like, I imagine myself laying in a beautiful green field, or, I see myself laying in the sun with the breeze blowing across. They use their imagination. Standard biofeedback in the 70s was characterizing itself as being a form of new and novel cognitive learning, and I've never believed that. I've always thought it was some form of behavioristic conditioning, especially when you see that the people that are successful in using it to do whatever, decrease blood pressure or whatever, change brain waves, that they can't tell you how they do it. They can just tell you by analogy sort of how they use typically their imagination. So in my mind, it's entirely possible that even standard biofeedback utilizes non-local processes with elements of consciousness as intention as the motivators. I wonder whether, because remember, local and non-local, when you're hooked up to a biofeedback device, it monitors something. It could be a brain wave, or it could be muscle tension or perspiration or something. But how it is that the person experiencing the biofeedback alters the physiology is not understood in the least. And typically it involves imagination processes, which are ways of collecting and focusing consciousness along a certain intention. So I think it's entirely possible that there are non-local processes that are behaving even in standard biofeedback, let alone information-coded biofeedback. Okay, we're coming into basically the last section of the presentation. We've been about an hour, we'll be a few minutes more. I'd like to introduce a concept from Possibility Wave. It's called the faith field. Remember, we talked about field earlier, where there's some agent that creates an influence and so on and so on. Well, in this case, the agent is faith. I don't mean faith in the religious context, although it's part of it. Faith in the psychological, experiential, existential, right? Faith. The faith field, what is it? It's an aspect of non-local conscious behavior that amplifies the interaction with the information field, with the I field. It's an amplifier. The faith field is an amplifier that amplifies the interaction of the person with the I field. The faith field is an amplifier. So what's the faith field? What is that? For one thing, it's a good thing because it helps. Here's a bit of a kind of an equation, a formula, because I see the faith field as a construct. You take belief plus motivation plus attention plus intention plus conviction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, basically in sequence, one thing leading and setting up the next, and what you have is the creation of a faith field. Creation of various fields and information forms is well understood in many traditions, certainly in the Taoist tradition and the related Qigong practices. It's used extensively, and it's also used in a number of both the Hindu and the Buddhist tantric traditions, where you assemble concepts and imaginations and so on, and you create an actual field as a consequence. Here, I'm talking about the faith field. Okay, belief comes first, and it's what I call the gatekeeper. If you want to create a faith field, an amplifier of information processes and intention, you've got to really have a solid look at the beliefs that you carry into the process, what you really, really deeply believe to be the nature of reality and life. And I'll refer you again back to part 1 if you've not looked at that. Belief can either permit or restrict possibilities. Boy, that's cold water. It's really, really true. So the clarification of one's own belief, it's a demanding process of self-exploration. I mean, it's for anybody that seriously is engaged in this throughout their life at different times or all the time. Sometimes you're kind of shocked into it, other times you're delighted into it. It's a demanding process because buried in the belief are a lot of untested axioms. You know, we in different ways, we're dogmatic with ourselves and with others. And you may recall from part one that the axiom, these things that are buried in our belief systems, that these are self-evident truths that we say require no proof, but they need to be tested experientially to really believe in them. Otherwise, they sit as very stubborn, stiffened dogmas. And if the dogma is weakening or infecting your belief, setting up the faith field is going to prove to be extremely difficult. I won't say impossible, but wow, tough. In the formula, the second one is motivation. This is the why you are wanting or doing what you do. So first comes belief. Second is, okay, now that you've clarified your belief and you're setting this thing in motion to create the faith field, what's your motivation? Why are you even doing it? Because, you know, it's this why that's going to align you at some very deep level with specific resonant flows of information. Information is existing around us all the time, and what we resonate with, you know, what we can vibrate with, if you want to use that term, is going to be strongly associated with the why, the motivation to why you're wanting to create a faith field for these purposes. What's the why? There are spiritual traditions, and again, I'll use Tibetan Buddhism as a reference, that place the highest significance on the motivation of any action involving conscious decision making. So once you've had a good, honest look at your belief systems, next do the check as to why am I wanting to do this? What's my motivation? Number 3 comes attention. This is a deliberate action. You know, you can't just be diffuse and kind of laissez-faire. There is this focusing of awareness into the consciousness when you're developing and creating a faith field. Remember the opposite effect from the pair research and biofeedback? This focusing must be open and relaxed without tension or strain. You know, it's the hidden anxieties and all of these bugs that can be bothering this attention. So it's not hard and fast, it's not the furrowed brow kind of sweating focus. This is a very open and relaxed style of focusing. And to me, one of the most beautiful kind of examples or analogies is they say, it's like a mother gazing lovingly and effortlessly at her new baby. So when you clarify the belief that permits the possibilities, when you honestly admit to the whys and motivations as to why you're doing what you're doing, in the construction of the faith field is now the inclusion of attention, like a mother gazing lovingly and effortlessly at her new baby. Intention. This is the what in the equation of creating the faith field amplifier effect. So many of us talk about intention all the time. It's spoken about so often, but without inclusion of belief, motivation, attention, and you'll see, conviction, the intention may only act as a concept without any effect. It's impotent. It's the what, but without the clarification of belief and possibility. Without honestly arriving at why you're entering this, why you want to create it, the why of motivation, and without this attention, mother to baby, this open awareness without tension, without anxiety, it's unlikely that focusing on the intention, the what, is going to have any effect. Lastly, conviction. Conviction is the last of the five in the equation to create the amplifier called the faith field. And it's the glue of confidence that holds it all together. Because the faith field as an amplifier is going to help move the experience from the possible to the probable and eventually to the certain. If the conviction is not real, it's not going to hold it together because there are so many variables that can enter into the evolution from possible to probable to certain. And the conviction can be very easily weakened by unrecognized axioms in one's belief. And you can see this takes us full circle right back to the first step in the faith field creation equation. So even though it's written in a linear form, it's actually more of a circle. And as you go round and round in this circle, you could imagine, this generates the faith field. So, I'm hoping that this roughly an hour or so has given you food for thought. The title of part 2 is Compassionate Communication. I hope you'll consider the ideas and test them in your own experience. Think about local, non-local. Think of local as energetic transmission, space-time. Think of non-local as information manifestation that occurs instantaneously outside of space-time. And think of the faith field and what we can do to amplify the effects in all of these different processes. The simple process, well, maybe it's not simple. The everyday process of simply being alive and making decisions and what that entails, and certainly how it affects information-coded biofeedback as a methodology and as a practice. The next 2 parts will be coming along shortly, and part number 3 is looking at the energy encoding of signals in biofeedback. And then the part number 4 focuses on the information processes in signal encoding. I hope this has been good for you, and I look forward to our next chance to be together. Thank you very much.